Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest installment of our webinar series. Thank you all for taking some time to join us. So it's 11 o'clock. We will kick off now. We'll run through the topic of the day, which is the rise of GA4 and the end of retargeting as we know it. So myself, I'm the CEO here at QueryClick, and Malcolm will be running this webinar today. So Malcolm, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. I'm head of paid media, QueryClick. So what I'll be talking about today is having a look at remarketing and what that means for you through GA4 alongside Chris.
Fantastic. So thank you. I will use a deck while we run through. So let me just share that with everyone just now. And we also have a poll, which we'd like to put out. And I'll get the poll question up straight away. And the poll question is, how influential is retargeting to conversion for you? So you should see that popping up in front of you just now. Do please just take a second to give an honest response to that. It'll be interesting to see what the outcomes are. We'll revisit that after we take a quick sort of 10-15 minute step through some of the points of discussion today, so we can kind of get a feeling and share amongst ourselves as a community where we all are and how we're all feeling about the changes that are coming our way with retargeting and that ecosystem. We had a couple of previous webinars which are available to access again. You can jump onto the QueryClick website, sign up for our marketing collateral and reach out, and we can point you in the direction of those. The last one we ran was on the legal status of Google Analytics, and off the back of that, there's a lot of demand for some detail about GA4 and how that operates. So that's why we've come up with the topic that we have today. So some quick talking points that were brought to life from that session on the legality or otherwise of Google Analytics. This is off the back of some recent changes to how GDPR has been viewed by the European Union. So France had followed suit of Austria in declaring that Google Analytics was illegal under GDPR due to the fact that data is sent to the US. It's not something that you can prevent, and the US can and will access that data without consent being provided by individuals in the EU and indeed in the UK. There are two GDPRs, the UK and the EU GDPR, and the UK GDPR incorporates all of the requirements of the EU GDPR. So Google actually put a webinar out on that, so our discussion point jumped off the back of that. Google is not going to attempt to change Google Analytics, its sort of original version. It's also known as Universal, so Universal Analytics. So that, as it stands, remains illegal today. Google also is encouraging people to move onto their GA4 proposition, which is an event stream architecture, which we will touch on a little bit today. And it is planning to try and make that not illegal as it stands by restricting data access from the US and also allowing the selection of European-based data centers. That's not been done yet, but Google did commit to doing that by the end of this month that we're currently in. So that's the sort of state of play. The other kind of point, and the reason why we've invited Malcolm to come and talk to us today, is GA4 is quite different from Google Universal. It uses a different architecture. So it's an event stream architecture, which is the same as our analytics solution here, Corvidae. And also, there will be no data portability offered by Google. So if you are using Google Universal, so the existing, very commonly deployed version of Google Analytics, you are not going to be able to port any of that data into GA4, and Google is going to sunset Unified on July the 1st in 2023. So if in your reporting you're looking to do year-on-year comparison, you really need to be getting up and running with an alternative to Google Universal today. And so that's really why I think it's top of most people's agenda for discussion. So I'll invite Malcolm to maybe talk to GA4, how it's different, and specifically talk a little bit about remarketing and that side of activity. Malcolm?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so when we think about remarketing, there's a fundamental difference when it comes to GA4. So GA4 architecture relies on Google Signals rather than kind of more, I guess, like cookie-based, third-party cookie-based remarketing segments that we're used to. So, for example, building segments in Universal Analytics, targeting users that have added to basket, for example. Now with GA4, the basis of that remarketing is built upon Google Signals. In order to retarget, we must first turn that on. So I would implore you to set up a GA4 profile, turn that on, enable ads personalization when linking those two accounts together, so Analytics and Google Ads. To activate remarketing for GA4, gone are what we used to call user segments, so creating those segments in Universal Analytics, and then come the concept of audiences in GA4. So instead, audiences are created based on events or aggregated data coming from those Google Signals, and that is then ported out to Google Ads for audience-based remarketing. And while Google Signals uses aggregated data to ensure that there's no identifying personal data available in collecting that, there's still a lot of privacy considerations to be aware of when collecting that. So when you turn this on, you're essentially entering into an agreement with Google that you have the consent to retarget those users. So it is imperative that you can review the consent models that you're currently using on site and how you're collecting that data. And it also comes into play on the next slide.
Yeah.
So in Google's webinar, they've quite forcefully brought out the fact that if you have a server-side tagging setup, you'll be unable to do what I just talked about. So you're unable to use kind of remarketing audiences that are built based on the back of data that's coming in through server-side tagging. So what that is if you are manipulating the data in some way before sending it to Google Analytics measurement protocol, it's just something to be highly aware of because this could severely impact the way that we currently remarket to users through Google Ads these days.
That's great. So thank you, Malcolm. Remarketing is something that quite often props up performance, and that's really down to the fact that users are quite far along their conversion path, typically by the point that they touch a website. So it is very important from a performance point of view to make a decision on what solution you're going to use going forwards. As part of that decision, I think it is also valid to consider what you are being offered when you are being offered retargeting and prospecting options. There's a fascinating public study. Again, these slides will be shared, and these are all referenced links in here. It's well worth digging into this study that's referenced from 2019 by Nauman, Tucker, and Whitfield. In summary, what that study looked at across billions of dollars of media spend was the incrementality or otherwise of third-party data for targeting, so retargeting as well as prospecting. And the summary finding from that study in 2019 was that to get any incrementality at all for a normal display ad, so an image-based display ad, you need to be spending 2.5 times the cost of the ad itself, and for video, you need to be spending over 1.5 times the cost. And that really is telling us that it's only premium inventory that is driving incrementality when it comes to using targeting data, third-party targeting data of any kind. Now, that suggests that although there may be options available using signals, it is also worthwhile looking at how you can avoid incurring cost and avoid wasting spend by not gaining incrementality, by not thinking deeply about where and how you're using retargeting solutions. The other sort of infrastructure point that is worth highlighting is, of course, Malcolm talked about Google trying to use Google Signals, so logged in Google accounts as part of a replacement for third-party cookies. Third-party cookies are gone from 40% of the user agent marketplace today. They'll be going from Chrome at the end of this year. Google did propose its alternative recently, which is topics. So you can see here some of the data and information that they've shared. They're going to use 350 different topics for their cookie replacement for us to use to bid against for anyone on the Chrome browser, which, as I say, is 60% of the user agent market share. Now, 350 is a very low number of topics. To give the example here of a specialist coffee company, the closest topic that you would be able to associate your bid against in Chrome is not single origin coffee or specialty coffee. It's not even coffee, it's food and drink. So it's possible that topics will be broadened out a little bit more before the end of the year. But as it stands, I think the common understanding is really because there's such a limited range of topics, we can only really expect our cost per clicks to increase with this change. So the role of retargeting and prospecting is really under scrutiny at the moment. And I think we need to be diligent in terms of looking at how we can improve on performance there. Now, one of our previous webinars, which we may come back and revisit this month, just based on user input and questions that we've been receiving over the course of these webinars, is to come back and look at some of those alternatives in a bit more detail. We know, for example, that the use of cookies or deterministic solutions like signals delivers analytics data that ultimately is only about 20% accurate when you're looking at a complete customer visit. So that means 80% of the data that's being used by these more sophisticated systems offered in GA4 is incorrect, and that will cause performance issues just in the same way that performance issues are being caused with third-party cookie data today. Now, we obviously are heavily invested in the use of AI. We've pioneered use of AI for stitching together customer journeys, and that is something that we have global patents on, and we have productized, released technology in Corvidae that's delivering great results for customers. That takes the only 20% accurate measurement up to 95% plus accurate measurement. There's obviously been a lot of interest in that, and we will make that the topic of our next webinar. So just to quickly summarize before we move into the survey results, and then we'll go into the question and answer part. The challenge today is it's highly likely that unless you are buying premium inventory, spending 2.5 or 1.5 times the cost of your ad, your third-party data today is highly likely to not be incremental. Secondly, your measurement systems, universal, is illegal as it stands in the EU and the UK, and GA4 currently is, although that should change by the end of the month. And finally, to have an accurate measurement system, you do need to move away from deterministic systems, such as using Google Signals, to instead look at AI-based systems that have this much higher level of accuracy. And that enables strategies like broadly buying ads for prospecting and measuring their performance with attribution highly accurately, so that you can then refine your strategy. So I'll jump into the poll section. Let me just stop sharing this for just now. And we can have a little look at our poll results. So believe we have in here. So the question, just to recap, was how influential is retargeting to your conversions? So results are for high, 44% respondents, very high, 25%, low 19%. Critical is 6%, and not sure is also 6%. So it's sort of dominated, I would say. So 50% are either high or critical, by retargeting being a really important part of the stack. I think probably that relates back to its position in the conversion path. So clearly an important topic to be investigating at the moment. So I'm going to open up the questions. Please do keep submitting them. Any we don't get to live, we will do a roundup and share that with all attendees. So there's a question in here which is around the steps that marketers should take now to get ahead of the change. Malcolm, I wonder if I could maybe put that to you, just from a basics point of view. Really, what actions do people need to consider taking today?
Yeah, sure. So I think right now we should be considering, when do we need to switch to GA4? So, beyond July next year, you won't have data coming into Universal Analytics. The interface and the architecture is fundamentally different to what we're all used to at the moment. So I would advise just setting up a sandbox at the moment. If you don't have a GA4 profile, getting used to how it operates differently, how it's tracking, and those fundamental changes to both the user interface and the measurement protocols. Even the hierarchy is totally different. So for example, we don't have separate views in GA4. It takes a step up back to kind of properties, which means that those current hierarchies that we're used to of filtered data and different profiles kind of go away. So that's something that we need to take into account. We also need to take into account how are we going to measure like for like and comparisons against that data, because again, it's fundamentally different in the way that we are GA4 is measuring compared to Universal Analytics.
Yeah, thank you. There's a sort of semi-related question, which is partly on the architecture. It might be one for me to cover. Luke Roberts has submitted a question. How does Google Signals fit in with the topics and Fledge elements of the privacy sandbox? So I think that's a great question. Google Signals are derived from a number of different places. I can connect that back to topics and Fledge. Would you like to talk a bit, Malcolm, about Google Signals and exactly what that is and where Google's driving that?
Yeah, I think in terms of the change, especially if we think about paid media, again, Chris covered this in like looking at the topics and that I guess like deterministic view on retargeting. It's ultimately going to essentially get worse. I think this helps link into another question, which is about is first party data as relevant in terms of targeting customers. I think Google Signals is a bit different in terms of how we think about retargeting users, and kind of moving away from that approach, we can ultimately see higher costs because we don't have that accuracy in retargeting anymore with Google Signals.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I mean, signals are an attempt to sort of offer a replacement deterministic join there, where you have a signed in Google account that they can be applied. But again, as Malcolm kind of highlighted, there are compliance requirements around that as well. I think the way it interacts with topics is very limited as we understand it from Google at the moment. It's worth saying, really, topics was only released in any detail just over a month ago, and the APIs are available for developers to look at integrating topics using their bid structures, but it's not fully defined yet. And signals as a deterministic measure is only going to be relevant within places where Google has access to the fact that Google someone is logged in. They'll have a wider level of access in Chrome, so you would expect to see some level of performance overlap with topics. To that point, Malcolm, you touched on there about first party, and I suppose underpinning all of this change in retargeting is with cookies going away, with cost per click is very likely to go up with the use of topics and other recent changes. What can we do to make the most of our first-party data and build strategies around that?
Yeah, so again, we're seeing this more and more from both clients and our own activity in terms of underutilized first-party data. I think one of the steps that we should be taking at the moment is thinking about how best we can actually utilize that first-party data within our platforms. So we already probably use first-party data in terms of finding lookalikes on Facebook, for instance. There's a lot more that can be done there. It's thinking about the logical segmentation of that data and how we can apply it to Google Ads in terms of search audiences, but also on other platforms, Facebook programmatic display as well. So it's really important to have a strategy in place for that first party segmentation.
Yeah, thank you. There's a sort of related question which I'd like to talk to a little bit from Alexander. So Alexander was asking about, do we think the removal of cookies will place more value on customer data and the use of this in targeting the customer via the likes of Google Ads and Facebook ecosystem? So you've talked a little bit to that already, Malcolm. I think the other thing to call out there in Facebook specifically, so obviously there was the iOS 14.5 change that occurred, and that had a dramatic impact on the overall performance of Facebook. I was looking at some end of year stats a couple of months ago, and there seems to be fairly wide consensus that there was an increase in cost of between sort of 22 to 25% on a kind of CPC or a CPM basis for Facebook advertising as a result of that change. It's worth flagging that Google themselves, they obviously have the Android operating system. They've called out there's a 2-year timeline now until they essentially deploy their equivalent of the iOS 14.5 change. So iOS 14.5 is about 30% of the market share, and the vast majority of the remaining market share, i.e. nearly just shy of 70% essentially, is Android. So there is again a kind of ticking clock there on the performance quality of specifically Facebook, but kind of all social platforms that are dependent on data collection in-app to deliver good targeting value. Connected to that, and I think it's something that, again, we can touch on in the next webinar, so please do jump onto the QC site and sign up if you can, or drop us a note if you're unsure about how to do that. We'll talk a little bit about uses of AI to, yes, of course, improve measurement to 95% plus in a completely cookie-free environment, so first and third party. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about some of the mechanisms behind that and the benefits that can deliver for marketing performance, because it's helpful to have a way that we can introduce reducing cannibalistic spend, improving our CPCs and CPMs when we're getting increased costs essentially coming through from the ad tech over the next year and a half, and also how that can be a nice compliant solution for marketers and remove any questions about illegality. There was a couple of questions in the Q&A slot about alternatives to Google, because obviously as it stands both are illegal under GDPR. Google acknowledges that. Yes, there are compliant alternatives. Our Core Day product is obviously one of those, and we'll touch on some of the controls that gives you there as well, and touch on also the event stream architecture that it uses and shares with GA4. So we're more or less at time. I think we do have a few other questions, but I think I'll probably pause it there. We can deliver sort of written up answers as well post this event for everyone who's signed up. The recording and the slides will all be made available. I think we had a couple of questions about that. It really only remains to say thank you to everyone for sharing a bit of your morning with us, putting in some really interesting questions. Hopefully everyone found that useful, informative. There are immediate actions in there. There are ways that we can get performance improved. And obviously, if you're enjoying the webinar series, do sign up. We'll have another couple coming out this month. So thank you, Malcolm, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And yes, thank you all for your time. That will be us.